So this morning we're just going to make some very simple melt and pour soap. We're going to make a batch for a school fete that they're having. So firstly we need to take the melt and pour base. This is a 1 kilo block, which I'll split into two halves, but we'll cut it into pieces. You can melt it any way you like, however probably the easiest way is in the microwave. So we're just going to put blocks of it into a container and pop those in the microwave. Now you can add your colours and fragrances later if you want to, but I find it a little bit easier to add it at the beginning. So I'm going to mix everything into these takeaway food containers, melt it all down at once and then use it that way. So I'm going to make 3 different fragrances here. We'll do one at a time. I've got lemongrass, pina colada, and a rose geranium with pink clay, which is a little bit more of a specialty one. So we'll start with the lemongrass. That's a little bit easier. It's got some soap in there that's a sort of bluey green colour that we've had once before. That's okay. We'll just melt down on top of that. So I'm going to add a little bit of the lemongrass fragrant oils. You'll probably have yours in the 10 ml bottles. I go through a lot of it, so I'm using a litre. And usually you'd be looking at 3 to 5%, although I just tend to pour it in. And I've decided that I'd like to have this one green, so a few drops of the pigment dye. If you don't get enough, you can always add more later, so adding more is not a problem compared to taking it away. And then, as mentioned, we're just going to melt it in the microwave. And that can melt for 3 minutes, and while that's happening we can mix up the other ones also. So one of these is to be a rose geranium. I'm using pure rose geranium essential oils, and I want it to be quite a heavy scent because this isn't going to be used for a couple of weeks, so I'm adding a little bit more than I usually would. And a little bit of the pink dye. It looks red, but it will come out pink when we're finished. And to make it really, really special, I'm going to add half a teaspoon of French Aguilette's clay. And that will melt through the soap, and when you use it, it'll be a very nice skin refining soap, so it will make your skin feel really clean and soft. Then the third batch that I'm making is going to be pina colada. So I use some of the pina colada fragrant oil. It smells great. And I think I'll use this yellow pigment. Okay, now all that's left is to melt those down, stir them through. If you're not happy with the colour, you can add a little bit more. Always go a little bit light, because if you want to add more, that's easy, but you won't be able to take it away if you've made it too dark. So let's see how they melt down. I'll see you in a couple of minutes. Now this has been in the microwave on high for about 3 minutes. You can see it's not fully melted, but we're just going to give it a gentle mix and then pop it back in for about another minute. All microwaves vary just a little bit, so it depends on your microwave how long you leave it in for. But if you it's always better to go a little bit more slowly than to really boil it. But you can see already you've got this beautiful, rich, creamy, lovely soap in the Renaissance range. And this one is scented beautifully with the lemongrass. It's quite a strong fragrance. While I'm mixing that through, actually we could put 2 of the others in, so let's get the No, that won't work because I haven't got enough moulds to do it. So let's just do one at a time. We'll give this another 10 seconds to a minute. That's been in for nearly a minute and it's almost completely melted. So we'll just give it a little stir. There's still some lumps in there, but what's probably easier to do with those lumps is to pour some of the soap base out and then remelt what's left. So we just mix it all up. So particularly with this one, it's an essential oil. So with essential oils, you really want to make sure that all your oils mix through so that you're not getting the oil on the surface of the soap. And then we're just going to pour that into the moulds. You'll see some of them have got some little bubbles appearing. Some of those will come out. If you tamp them down a little bit, you'll get rid of that. But also, if you just give them a spritz with the isopropyl alcohol, that will completely remove that as well. Okay, so now the lumps become apparent. Now we want to leave enough melted soap in there because remember it's the melted soap that's got the colour and fragrance. So if I tip all the melted soap out, and, oh, there we go, that was the bit on the bottom that wasn't melted, that's what's going on. So I'll break that up with the spoon a little bit. If we tip out all of the melted soap and then remelt just what's left in the lumps, you will find that they won't have the nice colour and fragrance. They need to mix that through. Okay, so we'll just pop that back in for a minute and mix that through. Now some of these have got tiny bubbles. If you don't mind about that, you could leave it, but if we have a close look at this one, I've got a bottle of isopropyl alcohol and you can see all the bubbles in the centre of it. These are almost setting now, so it's still not too late. Just give it one spritz and most of those bubbles will disappear immediately. There's our microwave. Okay. So we'll give that a little stir. Still not fully melted, but that's okay. I find that if you pour it a little bit and then melt it down again, you'll get there a lot quicker than waiting for the whole lot to melt. The other thing that will happen is if you melt it all, it will get too hot. So this is a really good way of doing it. Okay, again, just pour the soaps in. And if you don't have these fancy moulds, it doesn't matter. You can use a muffin container, you can use anything that you want to use really. Silicone moulds are fantastic because they pour so easily and the soap pops out really easily, but if you don't have them it doesn't matter. Now you can see I've got a few little lumpy bits that are wanting to pop out, so I'll just pin them back a tiny bit while I pour the last one. Okay. And again we've got a few little bubbles. Now that's freshly poured so it'll spritz a little bit easier this time. As you can see, just a tiny spray and all those bubbles disappear, which makes it really easy. Okay, so on to the next one. We can pop these in together to melt, the pina colada and the rose geranium. You may notice that while the microwave's on, I don't stand in front of it. Just a footnote on that, all microwaves do leak in different directions, and so that's a whole other topic, but just as a safety point, we keep away from them. You'll notice my microwave isn't built into my kitchen because I only bring it up when I need it for craft supplies. We don't actually use it for cooking. We use it for soap making and crafts and balms and sterilising objects, making potting mix, etc., etc. So just to give a little distance between yourself and the microwave while you're working. So whilst we're waiting for the soap to melt, we can have a chat about some of your dyes and fragrances. Basically anything that you've got you can use. I've had some really lovely soaps made with things that you'd find in the pantry, such as cinnamon and nutmeg. These particular dyes, the Renaissance dyes, are pigment dyes, and that's really important because they don't bleed. So they come in different kits. They're in 10ml bottles, and you can also buy them in 125ml bottles. But with one of these, even just in your 10ml bottle, it's going to last for a really, really long time, because as you saw when we put them in, you're only using a couple of drops. Now, the difference between your pigment dyes and your food dyes is that your food dyes aren't stable, which means that they'll bleed, they'll fade. So for example, red will fade in sunlight, blue will fade in moonlight. But let's say you made a soap that had different coloured layers in it, and it was white at the top and red at the bottom. You might find after about a week that the whole soap was pink. By using pigment dyes, that won't happen. Your colours will stay separated. I'll pop that there and get the soaps out. Now, people will often say to me, usually we're in a classroom situation. Today I'm in my kitchen, and so you can see I'm using my own cutlery rather than all the products that we would usually have when we're making soaps to sell or soaps that are used for a class. And people say, oh, well, you know, you've used your own spoons. But I think the thing to remember is that we're just working with soap, and we use soap as a detergent to wash everything anyway, so of course it's going to come off in the dishwasher or the sink anyhow. Now, if you take a look here, this one's a little trickier because remember, as well as the colour and the fragrance, we also added the pink clay. And the pink clay will go a little bit lumpy by its nature. So it's going to take just a little bit more mixing through. But it's a very specialty soap. If you were to buy soaps that contain French clays in the stores, you'd be generally paying at least $20 a bar for a soap like this. So with your soap base, it does drop in price depending on the quantity of it that you purchase, but you're probably looking at less than $14 a kilo for any of your soaps. And out of that, these are around about a 50 gram soap, 40 to 50 gram soap. So you're going to get about 15 to 25 soaps out of a kilo for $14. Plus, of course, your cost in that is your dyes and your fragrances and a little bit of the pink clay, which isn't particularly expensive when you buy it in a packet. You'll see that packet that we used it's less than $10, and I only used half a teaspoon out of it. Now, this is starting to set because I didn't have it quite hot enough. That's okay. But you'll see now, if you look, it's still got the pigments through it, but you can see that it's actually starting to all mix through into a really lovely soap. Now, we'll keep that spoon specially for that particular soap. And of course, if you were using these for selling or for commercial uses, you wouldn't be using your kitchen cutlery. You'd have sterile cutlery, as I do when we're making them for business. These ones are a donation, so I figure I can make them in my own kitchen today. So we'll pop that one back in, and it can melt down a little bit more. And this one is our pina colada that we're making, which smells divine. Okay, so let's just mix this one through. This one also, because we had the two containers in the microwave, they haven't melted nearly as quickly as if they were on their own, but that's okay because it'll just give us enough here to mix the oil and the colours through. And I can already see from this, it's not really yellow enough. Once the rest of that white melts, that's not going to be a really bright yellow, which is what I'm after. It's a sort of a gentle creamy colour yellow, but I'd like that a little bit darker. So I'm going to get a little bit more yellow dye and add into it. Again, it's just really what looks right, so there's no hard and fast rules, and obviously that looks a little bit too yellow for me. That's a bit more yellow than what I'm after, but I've got all these lumps of soap that are going to melt through and dilute that down as well. It smells absolutely wonderful. Okay, so let's just melt that down again. We'll swap the two over, the pink clay and the pina colada over. It's just about to pop out of the microwave. Is actually too hot at the moment. That's really warm, so I'm just going to let that cool down a tiny bit. We'll pop this one in. Okay, but it should all be melted. most of it, a couple of little lumps still in the bottom, and you can see this beautiful creamy pink that we've got mixed with the French clay, which is just going to be so soft and moisturising on the skin when it's used. And you could keep mixing if you wanted to completely get rid of all of those little pink specks. Personally, I quite like some of them in there because I think it's a nice point that it actually has the pink clay in it. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. So that's about ready to pour. Just wash that off. Okay, so you can have a look at that and you can see that it's got the little speckles through it. I don't mind. I'm going to leave those in there. I'm not going to mix them through any further, and I'm just carefully going to pour it out again. Now, if you wanted to make this on the stove top, that's fine. You can use any old pot that you want to. Just be aware that if you're adding fragrant or essential oils quite heavily, your pot may take on those fragrances, and so you might find that your dinner tastes like rose geranium. So it's probably a good idea to have a specialised pot for that. I was up in the shed this morning and I found this old pot in the shed, and I've brought it down thinking I'll give that a good scrub and I can use that one. It's an aluminium pot, which we don't cook with food anymore, and I found it up there, so I thought that'll be a great one just to melt down the soaps in if I don't want to use the microwave. Now we have a few little bubbles in here, so again I'm just going to spritz that, and all those bubbles will disappear, and you've got this pink clay. Now what's going to happen here is your pink clay is rising up to the surface, so on the back of the soap you can see quite a bit of that. On the front of the soap, once we unmould it, you won't see quite as much. You'll just have a nice little speckle through it, but I think it looks really pretty anyway. Okay, let's have a look at our pina colada soap. Nearly all melted through. Wow, this is my favourite smell. Okay, so still a few big lumps in there, however, enough just to mix that through, so we'll pour those out. Really lovely creamy soap as well in the pina colada, really indulgent. Okay, and again a few little bubbles, and that's probably going to be all I'm going to make for a little while. Obviously I've used up all the moulds that I've got here, so I won't worry too much that this has got the lumps in it, because by the time I'm ready to make up the next batch that'll all set anyway, so I'm just going to leave that here on the bench. It'll set. I'll wait until these are set, unmould them, and then I'll reuse these particular moulds again. So again, just to get rid of the air bubbles, just a tiny spritz, and that's all done. Now we can leave these to set, and then we're good to unmould them in our next stage. Let's talk just briefly while they're setting now about a couple of things, just to recap. So firstly, you've taken your base soap. This comes in white, it also comes in clear. I wanted to use the white in these because they're for a Mother's Day stall, and I wanted them to be really nice and creamy, but if you wanted to use clear and have a bit of a funky edge to it, there's a clear base available also. We use the microwave, but you can use the stove. You can use any heat source. So often when I go out to schools and we do workshops there, we'll take a little gas burner with us, or a hot plate, pop the pot on the hot plate. With children around, your microwave's probably the safest option because everything's contained and there's no flame or heat source, but you can use whatever you like. I put it in this microwave on high for about 3 minutes for the first batch, and then about 1 or 2 minutes for the second batch. You may also notice that the second batch took a little bit longer because we've got 2 kilos in there, so that took a little bit more time. It's just trial and error. As you can see, these are starting to set up a little bit now. Doesn't matter, they can be melted several times and at any stage of the process. The only thing that you really don't want to do now is to touch these finished soaps, because right now if you move them, they're set enough to get a skin on them, but not set enough to say solid, so they're going to move about and it'll ruin the look of your soap. We used Renaissance pigment dyes in either the brights or the plains. These ones come in 10ml bottles or 125ml bottles. You won't get any bleeding and you won't get fading with them. So they're a great colour to use for these. We added a bit of French pink clay into the pink ones. For your fragrances, we used a blend of pure essential oils and also fragrant oils, but you can use anything you've got if you want to. You can use perfume, you can use anything that smells nice that you would like to put in. And you've got your essential oils, your fragrant oils, and your synthetic and natri-identical fragrant oils and synthetic fragrant oils. So there's a range that you can experiment with. My suggestion to you when you start soap making is do it as cheaply as you can. If you want to go and buy the whole lot so you've got it, fantastic, that's terrific. But if you're not quite sure whether it's for you or not, buy a kilo of your soap base, buy 1 or 2 dyes, or use food dyes if it's for your own personal use and you don't care whether they fade. Use some fragrances that you've already got. You might add a couple of leaves, botanicals in here as well, and it can be all done really simply and really cheaply. And you can see with this in the course of 15 minutes, I've got 20 lovely soaps here. Had I gone and purchased these in the shops, particularly with the French clay, I'd be looking at $10 to $20 per soap. So I've got $200 to $400 worth of soap here out of 2 kilos that has been melted down with a little bit of colours and fragrances. Okay, so these are actually still warm to the touch. If I wasn't in a hurry for the moulds and to get them out, I'd probably leave them an hour or so. They've been about 15-20 minutes now. So if they were really set, I'd just bend them out and they'd pop out. With these ones, because they're still slightly warm, I'm just going to carefully peel the edges away from the soap. And the beauty of silicone moulds is they just pop out so easily. So here's my mould, spotlessly clean, ready to be used for the next one because they're a really beautiful quality silicone. And here's the finished soap. And now the only thing that's left to do is wrap it up. You could put it into a cellophane bag and tie it with a ribbon. You could put it in a little gift box. I've got these lovely little ones that Renaissance stock, which are self-closing boxes, so it's all your packaging in one. And I've been up to the $2 store and just bought a little bit of this shredded cellophane. So I just thought to make it look pretty. Now it's going to be a tight fit in this box, but we'll see how it looks. So if I just pop a little bit of the shredded cellophane into the base of the box, when I close it, that's going to be the top of the box. So I just want to keep that in mind when I'm putting my soap in, and just carefully pop it in like this. And if there's a little bit of cellophane hanging out, I'll just trim that off with scissors a little bit later. Now my fingers are a little bit greasy from the soap, so I want to make sure I don't put greasy fingers all over my cellophane box and ruin the look of it. I think that looks really pretty. I just grab some scissors and just trim off these tiny little bits of cellophane. You could poke them all in, but you end up standing there for ages, so giving it a little trim is easy. And there you have it, your finished product. I think that looks terrific. I'm going to actually pop a label on these ones, so I'll just put a little label down the bottom that I'm going to make, and then I think it looks terrific.